at least in this region, is coming to an end. As mysterious as the lamprey to the end, I hear and have also spread the rumor that he's going to transfer to Oklahoma and head up that region. Another story says he's retiring. Some of you may be in the know, but most of us aren't. The Bureau admittedly hasn't dedicated any particular funding to lamprey since the lamprey conservation agreement was signed 5 years ago. Mr. Speaks was there. However, we do support tribes and tribal self-determination in their endeavors, especially in fisheries. And there is a sense of pride in the accomplishments that the tribes have pushed forward and that many here have accomplished. I think there is a future, and it's past due for bigger ticket items, research projects, and so I'm hoping we get to that stage. There is a pending deadline, January 12th. The RFPs are out for 4 categories of natural resource funding in ESA, invasive species, tribal use, and hatchery maintenance. Some of these may apply, can be sort of worked into meeting those criteria. Climate change grants aren't gone yet. They're on a different schedule. So that's another thing that might be applicable. So thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Sir.
I'm Kelly Kudenika, Nahakutana Aite. Friends, my name is Kelly and I love the Calgary people. I'm really happy to be here today. 5 years after our first Conservation Initiative meeting, Cow Creek wants to reaffirm our commitment to the agreement, and I would just like to echo some of the things that the other tribes have already mentioned. It's really important for me personally, being a Cow Creek tribal member, having another daughter on the way, to teach them about our traditional lifeways and fisheries. And I really want there to be lamprey in our rivers when my children grow up, and their children, and 7 generations ahead. The work we're doing is really important. We've been doing a lot of research, and I know that we're ready for action, and a lot of us have already been doing on-the-ground projects and taking parallel tracks with research and on-the-ground restoration efforts for lamprey. And I think this is a good way to move forward. It's important that we have a coordinated, collaborative effort to move things forward, to spend our funding wisely, to work together, since lamprey are a pan-victim population, and what we do in the Umpqua and the river basins are ultimately going to benefit lamprey in Columbia as well. I want to thank the agencies that have recognized that lamprey are important, especially culturally important. A lot of the folks I've worked with from Forest Service, BLM, ODFW, Fish and Wildlife Service have been doing wonderful things. And without this collaboration and coordinated effort, we wouldn't be as far as we are today, and we won't be able to move any further. So I really want to recognize that and thank them. I know I've personally bugged most of the biologists in the Rogue and Umpqua basins for information about lamprey, and they've all been wonderful to work with and very forthcoming with information. So I hope that we can continue those positive, good working relationships into the future. I don't have a big checkbook to bring to the table, but I'm hoping that we can all work together and leverage the resources that we have and possible new funding avenues to move our work forward, get more on-the-ground work done, and get the lamprey back in our systems. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Updating the risk assessment, regional implementation plans, and the high priority projects. Go ahead, Brian, if you could briefly.
So I met Roy back when I worked in Washington, D.C. I worked in D.C. for almost 10 years in federal Indian policy and community development. When my wife and I wanted to raise our kids back here in the Northwest, I was looking for work. And so Roy was like, hey, you should check out Bonneville. It's a good place to work. I was a little nervous about Bonneville, especially being from tribal community out here. I hear all these stories. But Roy convinced me to do it. I started off in Bonneville about almost 10 years ago in the tribal affairs shop. Long story short, I wasn't enjoying the work in that particular shop as much as I liked, and I was thinking about leaving. Roy, as you all know, he held court in his office, which is the Doubletree Hotel, lobby. Many of you probably met Roy there for coffee and breakfast. That's probably what I'll miss the most when I walk through there, knowing that I won't have coffee or breakfast with Roy ever again there. And he convinced me to switch to the Fish and Wildlife program, not leave Bonneville, to stay there and go to the Fish and Wildlife program. And so he helped make that happen. And now, about 8 years later, now I'm the director of that program. And I don't think I would still be at Bonneville if it weren't for those morning sessions with Roy at the Doubletree. So I think I want to lead with that Roy's ample story since we're honoring him here today. One of the last things that I actually had a chance to work with Roy on was what I want to announce today in partnership with the Fish and Wildlife Service and Pacific States Marine Fishery Commission and the Northwest Power and Conservation Council. Don, you keep calling it the Planning Council. They changed their name a while back to the Conservation Council now, which is great for a conservation agreement like the Lamprey Conservation Agreement we're working on here today. So as many of you know, we've talked a little bit about the Columbia Basin Fish Accords, which was a great moment here in the region where tribes were provided, our tribal partners and state partners were provided an opportunity to, I think, educate the federal partners on the value and importance of other species such as lamprey. We've committed about $2 million a year annually to the Columbia Basin Fish Accords to study and some of the early work we've done here on lamprey. I think it's fair to say that we've learned a lot, and we've been convinced of the value of these species at BPA. So while the accords may be coming in their current form coming to an end, the lessons we've learned will still be here, and we recognize the importance of lamprey. Irrespective if the accords exist or not in the future, we at Bonneville are going to remain committed to funding work with lamprey. It's the right thing to do. We've learned that, and it's not just because of the accords that we're going to continue to fund those. Along those lines, we worked closely with the Power Conservation Council over the last, I'll say 6 months to a year, to identify cost savings. Funding that had been freed up because other projects had closed out, were not performing, etc. We have some of those funds set aside to increase our level of funding to lamprey. The details haven't been worked out, but I'm really proud of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission for volunteering and stepping up and helping us leverage a lot of the great work that's been done out of this forum. So the regional implementation plans, for example, are really great. They give us an action plan of how we can actually put this money on the ground to better, to begin the work, turning dirt for lamprey. So we're still working on the final details, but if Tony Grover were here, I think he would echo the sentiment that we're excited to kind of announce that we're going to be increasing our investment in lamprey for the foreseeable future to the tunes of hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. I really, it was really the leadership of the Fish and Wildlife Service and this implementation, this regional plan that we have here, the regional implementation plans, that made it an easy decision for us to make this decide to invest more in these initiatives. So I think that's some good news. There's going to be more money in it. We brought our checkbook, if you will. But there's still a lot to be done. And part of that is a commitment from folks here in this room to remain engaged. So we should give our friends and partners, both federal and other tribal partners that are not here today, our
Just to be brief, I think we've got a real opportunity here. This longer-term commitment that's been put in place between service, Bonneville Power. We've got a lot of good things going to happen in the Columbia Basin. Now our track is to find, as someone mentioned earlier, funding for the broader scale so that we can work in some of the other areas as well. I think that's the key. PSMC stand ready to help there too, depending upon what comes forward. So it's a good opportunity. We're looking forward to it and look for a long partnership on this stuff. Thank you.
Washington and Puget Sound, coastal Oregon, and then we have 7 regional management units in California. So this map shows what those regional management units are. And of course, not to forget that we have a main stem regional management unit, which is a little bit different than the tributary management units. And Mike Langsley from the Corps is here to talk about those, as well as Jen Poirier is going to talk about the Upper Columbia main stem and how we're doing with those identification of needs and ongoing progress. And then we have a really exciting new thing. We have an ocean regional implementation plan. This is something that we have been working on. There's a lot of information that we don't know about Pacific Lamprey in their ocean phase. And so Ben Clemens from ODFW has been leading up the effort, and we have developed an ocean regional implementation plan that describes what the threats and needs are for that very important part of Pacific Lamprey life cycle. So these are the regional management units that we're going to talk about today, and these are the speakers that will be talking about them. We're going to start it off with Jen Poirier. She is from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and my office, the Columbia River Fish and Wildlife Conservation Office. She's going to be talking about the whole Columbia Basin and all of the regional management units within the Columbia. So there are a lot of other partners and people who are actually leading these regional management units, but for ease of presentation, she's going to present the whole Columbia Basin. So the Willamette, the Lower Columbia, the Mid Columbia, the Upper Columbia, and the Snake regional management units of the Columbia. Then we'll transition into the main stem Columbia. Jen will talk about the Upper Columbia, and Mike Langsley from the Corps will be talking about the Mid Columbia and Snake portion of the main stem. Then we'll transition into Kelly Coates from the Cow Creek Tribe. We'll be presenting on coastal Oregon and Washington, including the North Coast and South Coast Oregon regional management units in coastal Washington and Puget Sound. Then we have Damon Goodman and Stuart Reed. We'll talk about the 7 regional management units from California. And then I'm going to come back and just give you a little bit of information on where we are with Alaska and the North Pacific Ocean, and just some updates on those regional implementation plans. So, Jen, take it away.
Morning. So I'm going to start off with a bit of background information just to kind of orient you to the process. So again, we're going to be discussing not only the risk assessment results, but just give you a highlight of the priority projects that were submitted in the different regional implementation plans, as well as just kind of giving an overview of some of the project highlights and some of these RMUs. So starting off, as Christina mentioned, we utilized in this 2017 risk assessment essentially the same methods and model that were used in the 2011-2012 assessment. We did make one modification, and I'll mention that now because it did have an impact on some of our results. So the NatureServe model characterizes occupancy as an area versus a linear metric. Now, that's fine for terrestrial species, but when you're trying to sort of estimate an area of occupancy for a critter that's, in a linear space, it's a little bit difficult. In 2011, the area of occupancy was essentially visually estimated off of GIS-derived maps. Now, in 2017, we updated this method we actually used a method that was kind of put into the NatureServe model in around 2012. And what we ended up doing is actually taking our GIS layers, both our historic occupancy and current occupancy layers, overlaying those with a 1x1 kilometer grid overlay. And that enabled us to calculate an actual numeric area of occupancy. Now, by doing this, as you can imagine, calculating this area of occupancy was actually quite a bit more conservative than those initial visual estimates of occupancy. And because of in many cases, the risk value for either current or historic occupancy actually declined, or it was actually kind of smaller, more conservative. And because of this change, in some cases, the overall risk rank actually changed. Now, as I move through the results today, I'm going to be pointing out those HUCs or those HUC 4 watersheds where the risk rank changed due to this kind of improved method, better information, or whether it changed by some other means. So just wanted to throw that out there. So, and just keep in mind, in many of these areas, we're going to see a decline in risk rank, and this is not at all due to a decline in lamprey range. It's essentially, we're utilizing a better way to calculate occupancy. So I just want to make that clear. Starting out with the Lower Columbia HUC, or the subunit. This is actually part of a larger unit. Willamette is part of the RMU. This subunit includes not only the main stem Columbia River, but also 6 HUC 4 watersheds that enter into the Columbia. And we're looking from the downstream end of Bonneville all the way to the mouth, to the Pacific Ocean. All right, the meat and potatoes of the risk assessment. This is essentially the risk ranking for the HUCs on on the left. You'll see the risk ranking results for 2011. On the right, you'll see the changes in risk ranks in 2017. So the colors that you're seeing actually correlate to the different ranking values. So the dark green color is associated with the ranking of an S4, which is secure, all the way to the dark red color, which is a ranking of SX, which is presumed extinct, and again, that has the dark red color. So those colors are correlated to our risk ranks. And what you want to be paying attention to is the pattern that you're seeing. The pattern is telling you whether the risk rank increased or got better, or whether it declined. When you see a kind of a checkerboard pattern, that means that the risk rank improved, or security of the population rose. When you see the vertical barring, that means that the risk rank declined. Areas where you do not see a pattern, those are areas where risk ranks did not change between the 2011 and the 2017 assessment. You will see some different patterning later. We'll see some vertical bars. That doesn't really have anything to do with a change in rank, other than it just means we did not have any information previously to rank that HUC. Okay. So, before moving on, we had a change in rank in 4 HUCs. All 4 of these ranks actually declined in their ranking. The Sandy and the Lewis, those areas declined from a ranking of S2, which is imperiled, to a ranking of S1, critically imperiled. Now, the reason for the changes in these areas is due to that recalculation of area of occupancy that I just mentioned. Now, in our 2 other areas, the Clatskanie and the Lower Columbia, these areas actually changed due to an increase in threats in these areas. Threats were previously ranked as moderate, now they're ranked as high in 2017. I want to highlight one of the real positive changes that came out of this RMU, and that's that we actually had an update of Pacific Lamprey population abundance in the Sandy, the Clatskanie, and the Lower Columbia. This was due to new information that was provided to us by Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. When they're out conducting their winter steelhead monitoring, they've also been collecting some spawning ground information, both lamprey adults and reds. They've been collecting this information while they're out doing the surveys, and they've actually been able to calculate an estimate of abundance for lamprey in these areas. Now, these estimates are conservative because the surveys typically end before the end of lamprey spawning, but they do provide us with at least a very minimum abundance estimate, and this is far more than we had in 2011, so a real positive change. So the graph here, the picture that you're seeing here, it's got a lot happening, so I'll describe it to you. What you're seeing are the priority threats in this RMU. Now, when we had our meetings with our RMUs, all of the different threat categories were given a numeric score from 1 to 4. 1 is associated with a threat that is insignificant. A 4 is a threat that is a very high threat. We average those scores out for each of the threats. Any score greater than 2.5 is considered a priority threat. So what you're seeing here are the 4 priority threats for the Lower Columbia subunit. Our HUCs are all listed to the left. The colored bars to the right depict the score for each one of those HUCs. The red bar is associated with a high ranking, or score 4. The orange is a moderate ranking, yellow is low, and green is insignificant. Here, the highest priority threat in the area is dewatering and flow management, followed by passage, stream and floodplain degradation, and water quality. When we see the box around a threat, that just means that this was a new threat in 2017. So we had 3 projects submitted to our regional implementation plan in 2017, and those addressed the threats of passage and stream and floodplain degradation. I wish I had the time to go into these in great detail, but I've got 4 other RMEs to go through. So I encourage you, we're going to be showing a link later today where you can access the regional implementation plans and you can read about these projects in more detail. I want to finish up this subunit by just highlighting some of the good work that's happened in the area in the last 5 or so years. Again, this is not an extensive list. Doesn't include everything that's been happening, just sort of a small snippet of work that's been happening. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has performed deep water sampling to document distribution and habitat use of larval lamprey in the Mainstem Columbia River. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife also did some laboratory and field study to investigate salinity tolerance of larval lamprey. And as I mentioned earlier, all that great work by ODFW, those spawning ground surveys for lamprey that have enabled us for the first time to actually estimate lamprey abundance in some of these areas. And it's not only the Lower Columbia, but as Kelly will mention, they've also been providing us information along the Oregon coast as well. So moving on to the Willamette subunit. This subunit includes the Willamette River Mainstem, as well as 12 HUCs that enter into the Willamette, sort of in that geographic boundary of the basin. Now this basin is heavily influenced by multiple large dams and human development. About 70% of Oregon's population lives in and around this area, so it has had an impact. Looking at our risk ranks. Overall, risk ranks changed in 8 out of the 12 HUCs. 7 of the HUCs decreased in risk rank, and this is because of that recalculation of area of occupancy. One of the fantastic improvements in the Columbia Basin was actually seen in the Clackamas. We actually saw the HUC increase from an S2, just imperiled, to an S3, which is now vulnerable. We've seen a vast increase in population size, as well as the small-term population is actually either stabilizing or increasing in this area. So the change, the increase, or lessening of risk, I should say, it could be due to PG&E's Clackamas hydroelectric improvements. They've done a lot of really great fish passage work, and it could have a lot to do with this. And there's also been a lot of excellent restoration work that's happening in the lower river. So a lot of good things happening in this basin. Our priority threats for the Willamette subunit, highest priority threat is stream and floodplain degradation. This is similar to 2011, although the severity, I must say, the severity of this threat actually decreased, so it's not as bad as it used to be. In addition to stream and floodplain degradation, water quality, dewatering and flow management, passage, this is tributary passage, it's overall passage, I should say, because there are several dams, and predation. Most of these threats ranked as moderate overall. Really no changes. These were all similar threats in 2011. Priority projects. We had 3 projects submitted in the RIP. They address the threats of stream and floodplain degradation, a large floodplain enhancement project, passage improvement, improving counts at Beaver Dam, and small effective population size, basically estimating the effective population size of Pacific Lamprey above North Fork in the Clackamas. So we have 3 project highlights for this basin, and the first is on the middle fork of the Willamette. The Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde is leading a multi-year translocation study This is occurring on Fall Creek, above Fall Creek Dam. So in collaboration, they're working with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers because they've been evaluating different collection techniques, different fish passage improvements in order to assist with the trap and haul program that will be happening hopefully in the future at the dam. In the Clackamas Subbasin, Portland General Electric, or PG&E's, lowermost fishway, it's called River Mill Dam. It was reconstructed in 2006 with a number of improvements for lamprey. Because of this, perhaps, they have about a 90+% passage efficiency, so very impressive at this fishway. Moving upstream at their North Fork fishway, passage is not quite as good. They've got about a 30% passage efficiency. So this fishway is currently under evaluation for possible modifications for lamprey. Associated with this, PG&E is also conducting translocation of adults above the North Fork Dam. They're doing this kind of as a stopgap measure until improvements for passage can be made, and as well as to increase juvenile production and potentially larval pheromone cues to that basin above North Fork. Finally, PG&E just installed a floating surface collector above North Fork. It was installed in about 2015 and surprisingly captured a large number of lamprey. We've got the numbers up there, over 17,000 lamprey. This is a surface collector, so that was quite impressive. Final kind of overview is a project, not really a project, it's an ongoing activity that many of you are familiar with, and that's at Willamette Falls in the lower Willamette Basin. The Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, Oregon, has been estimating adult abundance at this site since 2010. As has been mentioned, and probably will be mentioned, this is very unique. We have essentially no abundance estimates upstream of this, and it's providing a nice, accurate, consistent count of lamprey at the falls. Looking at the 6-year average from 2010 to 2016, the average abundance estimate was just kind of over 182,000 actually approaching the falls, and about 65,400 passing above the falls. Moving on to the Mid-Columbia. This RMU includes 16 different PAC4 watersheds that drain into the Columbia from basically the mouth of the Walla Walla River at river kilometer 507 downstream to Bonneville Dam. This area does not include the main stem. The main stem, Columbia River, is in its own regional management unit, which you'll be hearing about shortly. Risk rank results. Overall risk ranks changed in 3 of the 16 HUFs in this RMU. I'll point out that this is one of the cases where you'll see the vertical bars rather than the horizontal. That's just saying we had 0 information in 2011. Now we at least have enough information to say they're not present. So changes, the ranks actually declined from an S2 or imperiled to S1 in 3 of these HUFs, as I mentioned, and those were the Umatilla, the Hood, and the Lower John Day basins. Now, changes in the ACE areas, again, is the common theme right now, were the result of using that improved approach to calculate occupancy. 2 notable changes that I'd like to mention that have to do with population demographics. One was a substantial increase in population size in the Umatilla subbasin. Very exciting. Most of the other HUCs, population size basically was ranked the same. We did see a substantial increase in the Umatilla, and that's attributable to the translocation work that's occurring in that basin. The second is not so good news, was an unfortunate decline in short-term trend, population trend in the Klickitat subbasin. Declining was at about a 10 to 30%, and now seeing a further decline from 50 to 70%. They've been doing some smolt trapping or rotary screw trapping, capturing juveniles, and basically from about the early 2000s have seen a real perceptive decline in numbers, and now they're only capturing about 50 fish annually. We've got the priority threats for this RMU, quite a number of them. Main stem passage, of course, though, continues to pose the greatest threat to lamprey in this area, along with climate change. Climate change also ranked high, with the exception of the Klickitat Basin, which ranked moderate. Other threats in the basin include water quality, lack of awareness, small population size, tributary passage, stream and floodplain degradation, dewatering and flow management. Small population size, of course, associated with those main stem and tributary passage issues, was a new threat in 2017. We actually had 5 projects submitted to this RIP, and these projects mostly address the threat of passage, both adult and juvenile passage, as well as dewatering and flow management, and filling sort of a key knowledge gap. And again, I encourage you to see the RIPs. I unfortunately just don't have the time to give these enough explanation. In the project highlights, mentioned earlier the great translocation work that's occurring in the Umatilla Basin. So they've been translocating fish since about 2000, and it's still happening today. And along with the translocation, they're continuing to monitor larval densities as well as adult passage success to spawning areas. Yakima Nation Fisheries Program is performing distribution surveys in Rock Creek, Klickitat River, White Salmon River, and Wind Rivers. This information was extremely helpful in us, collecting information for this assessment. And associated with kind of on the same distribution survey line, the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs has been performing occupancy and density surveys in a number of tributaries within the Hood watershed, or the Hood Basin, including the Hood River, following the removal of Powerdale Dam in 2010, which is kind of cool information. Only in the past few years, they've seen distribution expand over 27 kilometers past the former site of the dam. This is into the east fork of the Hood River, so quite exciting. Along with that, U.S. Fish and Wildlife has also done some occupancy work in the White Salmon River, where they found the presence of both Pacific and Lampetra species above the former site of Condit Dam. So some exciting expansions we're seeing. Snake RMU. So the Snake region includes the Snake River, as well as all the tributaries draining into it from Hell's Canyon Dam down to its confluence with the Columbia. So unlike the other areas that you've seen, the Snake region is actually 3 different RMUs, and those include the salmon, the Clearwater, and the Lower Snake. Historic occupancy of Pacific Lamprey is believed to have been extensive in nearly all of the tributaries, as well as the Snake River upstream to Shoshone Falls at river kilometer 990, and basically had the largest and farthest inland migrating populations of Pacific Lamprey in the lower 48 states. Presently, the Hell's Canyon Dam complex on the Snake and the Dvorak Dam on the North Fork Clearwater have permanently blocked upstream access for pretty much all native species in this region. So because we have 3 RMUs, we're going to look at 3 different risk rank maps. Overall, there are 26 HUCs in the region, 7 of which changed. All of these increased in rank in 2017. Focus first on the Snake Basin. We saw improvement in 4 different HUCs, basically improving from an SH, which is possibly extirpated, to an S1, which is critically imperiled. A change in the South Fork salmon is due to supplementation efforts by the Nez and Perce tribe, while changes in the other areas are the result of either inclusion of data that was left out that they didn't have in 2011, or is just due to increased sampling effort in the last 5 years. Clearwater Basin, no changes in risk rank in 2017. Lower Snake Basin, 3 HUCs, again improving from a ranking of SH, possibly extirpated, to a ranking of S1, or critically imperiled. Changes in the Upper Grand Ronde and Malawa are due to those supplementation efforts by the Nez Perce tribe, while changes in the Imnaha are essentially due to more sampling and better information. So, the combined impact of not only the main stem, but also the Snake River dams is really the highest priority threat to the natural distribution, connectivity, and effective population size to Pacific Lamprey in this area. And we're going to get a view of our priority threats, and there's not a whole lot happening other than the highest priority threat, of course, is main stem passage and small population size. This is the salmon RMU. Clearwater, those are the only threats, and the Lower Snake, kind of seeing that theme of main stem passage and small population size as the highest threats. Lack of awareness was also ranked fairly high in the basin. Climate change, stream and floodplain degradation, and tributary passage were also threats. Tributary passage was a new priority threat in the Lower Snake RMU in 2017. We had 3 projects submitted to the regional implementation plan. Those addressed the threat of passage, assessing a diversion, small population size, basically keeping the translocation work, expanding translocation work, and filling a key knowledge gap, really wanting to begin to develop and implement eDNA sampling for distribution. So some of the project highlights in the Snake region. First, we have some translocation, as I mentioned, the adult translocation that's happening, led by the Nez Perce tribe. It's been happening since about 2007 in the Clearwater, Salmon, and Lower Snake drainages. And they've also conducted parentage analysis that has verified the spawning success in all of these areas. Adult translocation is also occurring in the Grand Run River, and that's been led by the Confederated Tribes of Umatilla Indian Reservation, and this has been happening since about 2015 to present. And associated with the translocation, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Idaho Fish Health Lab, and Dworshak National Fish Hatchery staff, they've been performing health exams and administering drug treatments to adults prior to outplanting. And electrofishing, the Nez Perce tribe is leading those efforts with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. Major dams that are owned by 3 public utility districts. We've got Priest Rapids Dam and Wanapum Dam that are operated by Grant County PUD. We have Rock Island Dam, which is the oldest dam on the Columbia that was constructed in 1933. Rocky Reach Dam, those are both operated by Chelan County PUD. And finally, Wells Dam. Wells Dam is just downstream from the Columbia River's confluence with the Mettown, Okanagan, and it is operated by Douglas County PUD. So under FERC licensing, the Mid-Columbia PUDs have Pacific Lamprey management plans that generally guide how to address project-related impacts, implementation of different protection measures, mitigation, how to develop monitoring, as well as how to develop monitoring and assessment programs. Again, presenting this information on behalf of the PUDs. Basically, Joyce want to provide you a small snippet of some of the improvements that have been made at some of the dams, as well as some of the passage efficiencies that they are currently seeing. So at Grant County PUDs, Priest Rapids and Wanapum Dam, the modifications for lamprey include plating over metal floor grading, installing ramps at perched orifices, lamprey traps, and new fish count crowders. There was a 6-year half-duplex pit study that was conducted, just assessing fish passage through these fishways, and efficiency at Priest Rapids Dam was about 84%, and passage efficiency at Wanapum was 87%, which I'm not familiar with these structures, but that sounds pretty darn good to me. So. Looking next at our Chelan County PUDs facilities. Rocky Reach Dam. Most of the modifications that occurred at this fishway happened in about 2011, so not a whole lot that's happened recently besides efficiency estimates. Modifications include installing ramps at perched orifices, plating over the floor diffusers, and plating in the auxiliary water supply. A full duplex pit study has found passage efficiency at Rocky Reach Dam in 2016 was 98.9%, and in 2017 is 97.3%. Of course, 2017 is not complete, and this project is still ongoing. Our final highlight is from the Douglas PD. At Wells Dam, they've modified grading near the window counters in order to provide more accurate counts. They've added a secondary entrance to the fish ladder using bollards and reduced velocities. They've tested reduced head differential at the ladder entrances in order to kind of encourage lamprey to enter the ladder. And they've also added an additional pit array that is able to detect in the ladder that is able to detect both half and full duplex pit tags. They've been performing a tagging study since about 2013 to better understand how fish are approaching and passing through the fishway. But unfortunately, lamprey are not really wanting to enter the fishway. So that has really hampered their ability to conduct their efficiency tests. They do have sort of this initial estimate for 2 different ladders. They're seeing efficiencies of 55% and 67%. And with that, I'm going to pass the mic to Mike Lansley with U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
One question we have, please. Jen,
Yes.
one brief question, please.
You know, time and time again, I've mentioned this even to our lamprey biologist Brian, or even Bonneville Power, and that's instead of going with these flat extension, flat places for the lamprey to pass and everything, to create a natural, more of a natural passage to where the lamprey will hear the water churning and stuff. Long ago, when we used to go down to Bonneville Dam to harvest lamprey on the middle island there, before we go down, they turned this pipe on, and there was a little concrete and rock area where the water tumbled over and everything, and by the time we got there, the lamprey would be thick and full, just like you see in that picture, and then we'd harvest those lamprey. And today, you guys try to create something that they're not used to. And I think, and I've asked this time and again, and I've asked Bonneville Power to create these little natural runways for them, where there's rumbling water and everything that's coming down. And to this day, I don't think they really believe in it. But just from looking at experience, or you look at Willamette Falls, you look at Shears Bridge, you look at John Day Rapids and everything else, where they concrete. And it's all that water that's churning. And I think, when you take this idea of studying them to death, and not really looking at common sense on what these lampreys are attracted to. I think that's what you guys need to do, is, look at that work and create something. You're doing an experiment, and I asked Brian about the experiment of putting a water pump and letting water run over that just to see if there's an attraction there on Bonneville. And I think it's something that would be well worth your time in studying passage. You learn that these lamprey are attracted to that type of water, that type of sound, where they can get up and get through them. And I'd really like to see that, that kind of study done, and actually done where tribal people can actually go look on and watch and see how that is occurred, or if they have any ideas that they can give to the scientific people. You remember, the tribes have really come a long way in these past years, and today they're scientific. We have a lot of scientific people that the Fish and Wildlife and all these other ones can benefit by utilizing the tribe's scientific people and what ideas they have, be it natural or be it, just a non-expensive way of creating something that would work, instead of putting all kind of stainless steel and everything else that's there, rears and everything else that is going to be how do you say it, impediment, I guess, to their trying to go through. But you hit something that you have where there's rocks and little waterfalls right along the banks, you'll see that they're really attracted to that. And if you have 4 or 5 of them and you got all your little collectors there collecting them, I think, you find that that works. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. One more question from Eric, and then we'll...
Good morning, and thank you, Jen. I think I'll answer some of the questions and issues you've just been addressing with your comments here. I'm going to be talking about passage of the main stem, Snake and Columbia rivers, work that the Corps has been doing to improve lamprey passage at our dams. While we don't have a completed regional implementation plan yet, that's not to say that we don't have a plan, and that we have a group that's been working diligently on improving passage at the main stem Columbia and Snake River projects. One of the things, you probably saw from the last presentation with these dams, is that they affect many of the other regional management units. They all have to pass through the main stem to get to the ocean, and so that's part of the reason why I think that they're so important. So the dams I'm going to be talking about are the 8 Corps engineers operated dams on the lower Columbia and Snake River, starting at the ocean with Bonneville Dam, and working your way up to Bell, John Day, and Marion, Columbia, and then on the Snake, on Ice Harbor, Lower Monumental, Little Goose, and Lower Grand dams. These dams all have passage facilities for up and downstream passage that are designed for anadromous salmon and steelhead. But the problem is they're not designed for Pacific Lamprey, and they have different passage requirements. Now, I didn't follow instructions and focus on the last 5 years, but I think it's important to recognize that we've been working on this problem for more than 20 years. Back in the early 1990s, there became a regional concern over declining numbers of lamprey returning to the Columbia Basin, particularly by the tribes. And in response to that, the Corps decided to incorporate Pacific Lamprey into a basin-wide rated telemetry study we were doing for salmon, adult salmon, and steelhead. We were going to take adult salmon and steelhead at Bonneville Dam, track them through the entire Columbia Basin and past the Columbia River system dams and up into the tributaries. So incorporating lamprey into that project, we thought would tell us kind of what's going on. We had no idea where they were going, where they were having difficulty. After the first year, we needed to figure out how we could take the critters. Nobody had done a lamprey telemetry study before, and so it wasn't until about 1998 that we started seeing results, and right away saw that less than half the lamprey we take were able to get over Bonneville Dam. So we refocused our efforts, focused on Bonneville Dam, just to determine what about the dam was what caused the lamprey, and trying to figure out how we could make passage better. With that, I think we identified latter problem areas and developed our first alternative lamprey passage structure. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but you saw some earlier pictures of these ramps that we've installed at Willamette Falls and other places to pass lamprey through difficult areas. A little bit later in the 1990s, we did start looking at juvenile lamprey as well. We were developing turbine intake screens to guide salmon away from turbines as they pass downstream. And testing in the lower river, we saw that at the Dalles and Dundee Dam, we were getting lamprey stuck on our extended length bar screens. And so we stepped back, did some lab studies to try and come up with criteria for what kind of screen clearance and orientation and design would not impinge lamprey, and did come up with design criteria. We did not end up putting those screens into either the Dalles or John Day dams, but we do have them on McNary Dam and the Snake River projects. We also started looking at how would we do a passage evaluation with juvenile lamprey. And so we started looking at mark recapture methods. How could we tag lamprey and do a passive study of the project in the field, similarly to how we do juvenile salmon studies. And the intent is to really get an idea of where they pass and how they survive the different routes of passage at the dam, so we can see if there were improvements that could be made there. What we learned back in those years was the smallest thing we could take lamprey with juvenile lamprey was a pit tag. And that didn't really provide the kind of information we needed to understand things like passage distribution. So fast forward to 2008, work really continued to 2008, but at a more limited level. We entered into the Columbia Basin Accords, and in particular interest to this group is the accord we have with the lower order tribes, the Yakima, Umatilla, Warm Spring tribes, and the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, where we agreed to develop a 10-year lamprey passage plan and fund that work over the next 10 years to a total of $50 million or about $5 million a year. We also agreed to work very closely with the tribes and adaptively managing that plan and its actions as we learn more about lamprey and implement things at the dams. So I want to talk a bit now about the kind of things we've done under the Accords work and the 10-year lamprey passage plan. Our focus was really initially on adults, since we didn't really have a way to evaluate juvenile passage in the field. And one principle really was to start lower in the river, where we saw the local passage. I should say, by the way, as we moved up the system, viewing through a lamprey really made to each subsequent dam, and so Bonneville Dam is the best place to start testing improvements. Plus, they had the largest population to get on the river, so it had the biggest bang for the buck for adult stream passage. I want to talk about 3 areas of adult passage improvements that we've worked on and implemented. This first one are these alternative lamprey passage structures. People call them really well. A lot of lamprey used it, and so we started building them and putting them in other dead ends. They've been fairly effective. At Bonneville Dam, these lamprey passage structures often pass as many or more fish than you see go through the complement of the standard ladder. So we have these at Bonneville Dam and at John Day Dams. Another area of improvement was at the entrance. That was another problem area for lamprey to get into. These large main stem dams have very big fishway entrances. The purpose is really to put enough flow out of them to attract adult salmon, so adult salmon can find them. But that means that there's a high velocity coming out of them, and lamprey just don't have that kind of swimming ability to get through the roughly 12 feet per second velocity coming out of these fishway entrances. So there's several concepts we tried. This is something you just can't go test in the lab. You've got to come up with the best you can do and plug it into a dam. There's actually 2 of this style, one at Bonneville and one at John Day. This particular concept is here's inside the fishway looking out the entrance. It's just an open, fixed slot. Here's the entrance here. What it does is allows lamprey passage all the way down to the floor of the ladder, where they can attach on the floor and rest as they come in behind these bollards or the large structures that stick up that provide hydraulic cover. That cover leads to a lamprey ramp structure, which they can readily climb, and that goes all the way up to the forebay of the dam. Like I said, there's one at Bonneville, one of these at John Day. We have another style of entrance structure we installed at Bonneville Powerhouse 2, and another style we tested at Canary Dam as well. Then the third area of adult improvement has been modifications to the inside of our ladders, the stair step portion. The lamprey, we have a 4 tribal lamprey work group. They visited all of our ladders after they were dewatered, prioritized improvements in areas that we thought we could improve, and did things like rounded rear corners so that lamprey could attach continuously all the way around through these high velocity areas. Built-in ramps over ledges and raised orifices in the weirs. Modified diffuser gratings with plating, so that lamprey had an attachment point, and narrowed the spacing in the grating. This is at John Day Dam, so that lamprey couldn't get through those gratings and into basically the ladder plumbing, which would be a dead end. We've just recently tested these rest boxes. We've installed these at the top of the ladder, and that's to encourage lamprey that get up near the top of the ladder to not drop back down, but hold it until night when many of the lamprey pass. Talk a little bit about juvenile lamprey passage improvements. We did do some, here we did some lab studies to better understand how lamprey might survive the turbine environment and spill environment. We did some pressure testing that you might experience in a turbine, and some hydraulic shear evaluation as well, and saw that lamprey were much more resilient than salmon to those kind of forces, and very likely survived turbine passage better than juvenile salmon. We also, with our screen work, have a couple screen actions. On the main stem Lower Columbia River, the one place we have the extended length bar screens that are a problem for lamprey, we install those a little bit later in the season, before the salmon numbers are too big, but while there's still juvenile lamprey passing the dam. And then at the Snake River Collector projects, we design and install screens in the tail slots of the raceways where we collect salmon for transport, but lamprey get incidentally captured. New screens allow lamprey to pass back to the river so they don't get transported along with the salmon. Probably the most important thing we got done under the Accords is the development of a miniature active transmitter that we can use to study lamprey passage at our dams. This was kind of a far reach. I'm not sure we'd actually get to this point, but we actually have a working acoustic transmitter that's about the size of a standard pit tag, and can be detected on the same equipment that we use for doing our salmon and steelhead studies at the dams. We can get passage distribution, spot roll, 3D position, travel time information. There's a picture of one, an X-ray in the lamprey, so you can see they're quite small. Okay, the last thing is just where we plan to go in the future. So for the next couple of years, we've got some more within ladder improvements to do at Bonneville, the Dalles, and John Day dams. We've got a lamprey passage structure improvement and some expansions at Bonneville, John Day. The John Day lamprey passage structure, that ramp, I had a picture of it earlier, doesn't go all the way to the floor base, so I believe that's going to get extended up higher and over the dam. We're going to install a new entrance structure like we have at McNary Dam, at Ice Harbor Dam. And I didn't mention this earlier, but one of the things we've been doing also within ladder improvements is assisting the tribes with their collection of lamprey for translocation. A few people have mentioned that. The Umatildas, Yakimas, and the Nez-Perce are collecting lamprey at Bonneville, the Dalles, and John Day Dam, and transporting some of those to the upper watersheds. And so we've got some trapping improvements to make to help facilitate that in the future. And then finally, we're pulling together a more detailed report of all the accomplishments and how their effectiveness that have been implemented over the past 10 years. Also, along with the improvements we're making, we're going to do a 2-year post-construction study to look at the effectiveness of many of these actions. It's in the spirit of not studying the animals to death. It's been since 2014 since we've done a radio telemetry and pit tag passage evaluation. It's time to kind of assess now the sum total of the improvements we've made.
Thank you, Mike. Let's give Mike a round of applause and the work that the board has done.